Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Board of Selectmen's meeting tonight, and we are so pleased to have you all. We're going to begin with a discussion of the street acceptance procedures here in Dover, and I would like to welcome all of you for coming. I appreciate, it's a great opportunity for us to have a discussion, and I'd love to ask if you have a history of how we have come to this point.
Well, earlier this summer, Joanne Fisher contacted me from the Meadows, and she wanted to talk about, the town's policy for acceptance of roads. Mm-hmm. And we had a very good conversation, and I said to her I thought it probably made sense to get everyone that's involved in the acceptance of roads, because I was not an expert on it, together at some point, because I was sure that the town had guidelines in which we had to adhere to that I, during our meeting, was not particularly familiar with. Mm-hmm. And so I know I asked Mr. Ramsey to help set up that meeting, mm-hmm. and I think tonight is a culmination of those efforts.
It's a wonderful opportunity. I appreciate that. And you're right, we invited the relevant boards to come. Thank you very much to both ZBA and Planning, and to you, Gino, and Craig, and to Mike, for all of our professionals in town who have come that have input in all of this process. And so I thought we would just talk a little bit about whether it makes sense for us to think about a working group, but let's share a little bit of information about how this all plays out. Who would like to start? Gina.
I could.
Good.
Well, the street acceptance process is specified by state statute. Mm-hmm. It's not a local process. I mean, it's not a locally decided process, and it involves, it depends on the origin of the road. If it goes through planning board subdivision rules and regulations, generally it follows the road construction standards of the planning board, which is laid out in the rules and regulations. It's all, in the Dover code. And then if the road is built and completed in accordance with those rules, then the developer would petition the town to accept the road. There's certain things they have to do, like prepare an as-built plan, prepare a street acceptance plan, which is basically the boundaries of the road. Then they petition the selectmen. The selectmen have a meeting to lay out the road, or declare its intention to lay out the road. And if property is being taken for that, in other words, the usual practice now is that the developer retains fee interest in the road layout, so he's the only owner involved. But in the past, and sometimes still now, that's not done properly, so under Massachusetts law, all the abutting landowners own to the middle. So this is not really that significant in the process, but only the landowners involved required to be notified, but in practice, obviously you're going to notify people who live on the road. So then they have that vote to their intention to lay it out. Then they have to have a public hearing. The Board of Selectmen has to have a public hearing, and at least, I believe it's at least 7 days prior to town meeting, and then it goes to town meeting, and it's up to town meeting. That's how it goes.
So you made a comment, if the subdivision comes before the planning board, so what kinds of subdivisions would not?
Well, there will be two kinds.
Okay.
Two types of roads. The first kind is, many of our roads were constructed years ago, way before the subdivision control law. And even some local roads were built although most of them now are taken care of, because most of them have been accepted. The other way is, and it's kind of relevant here, condominium development. Condominiums can be developed, their roads can be developed in accordance with the rules and regulations and laid out like in any normal subdivision, which was the case in Dover Farms. And it wasn't a normal subdivision, but the streets in County Court were also laid out in accordance with the rules and regulations.
Does that, may I, a question, does that have to do with the acreage? Does that have to do with the size at all, or whether or not they can be laid out?
Well, indirectly it does, because a normal layout would be like 50 feet wide.
Mhm.
And so if there's plenty of room, that can happen. It can meet that standard. Otherwise, it may not meet that standard.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite clear about that. All of the roads within the subdivision need to meet a width standard? Is that what you're saying?
Correct, under planning board rules and regulations.
Okay.
There's two widths involved. One is the width of the street right of way,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other width is the pavement width, which is not full length of the road. Because then there's also maybe a sidewalk or utilities and other landscape trees, street trees, those go in the right of way as well.
Interesting, thank you very much. Any time, gentlemen, I don't know if you'd like to respond to questions, or if you'd like to speak at all, or go right ahead.
No, I think Gino summed it up pretty much. I
Okay.
mean, this day and age, everything is pretty much based on the subdivision. We ask them to build it according to the subdivision rules and regs. And that's what's been happening. I know early in the 90s, there was quite a few unaccepted streets that were floating around out there. And we did develop a committee, or the town, we both did back in 96. And it was a very well thought committee, and we came to the selectmen and the town with a proposal to accept, I believe it was 28 streets at the time, and I think five more of those were private roads. And we did a lot of research, a lot of work with the residents, and particularly the ones on the private roads. They didn't want it to become public roads, just because of maybe a point of access to another road, or whatever it may be. So that's where we're at, and, right now, there's only, I believe, 6 roads or 8 roads right now that aren't accepted, and there's 6 private roads still currently. So, and I say those, the ones that are unaccepted, those are just about finishing up the construction, that's why those are still, as far as the town, we don't provide any services to those, particularly during construction. But,
So until the asphalt has been finished, I know there's another term for that, the town will not plow those roads or accept, so the town only plows roads when they're accepted. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
I'm sorry.
All private roads, the statute, the town voted back in 46.
I have a list that I got this week from Town Hall. Maybe it's an old list, but there are 20 unaccepted roads on that list.
And which office did you get that?
The town clerk.
Uh-huh. What would
Maybe
you,
it's an old list.
Well, I have the list from 1997.
Oh, I'm sure this is new, 1997, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
This one does not have, let me just see. This says 11/01, is that 2014, 2004, my glasses on? 2014. And there were, according to this, I'm relatively new to Dover, so
no, that's fine.
forgive me.
Yeah.
According to this, there are 20 unaccepted roads. And this actually has the dates of acceptance on them. I have 2 copies, one I've scribbled on and one that's relatively clean, if you want.
I'd be curious to see that list.
right, that would be great, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with Mr. Hughes.
I'm looking for it in here, I think I brought the, I did. may have, let me see. I made some notes about something.
The other interesting point that I heard you say, Chief, is that you believe that there are a number of roads in town that still are unaccepted by choosing by the residents who want to keep them private,
Private.
right? So in other words, perhaps some of the, we don't know of the 20, but it's possible that some
Well,
of,
private roads are marked on there, and my observation again was, I believe 2 are marked private, and I discovered in my own travels another 2 or 3 that say private. My question is, and again, forgive me, I'm naive to this. I'm new to Dover. I'm not new to town government. I worked for the city of Newton for 20 years. But I'm new to Dover town government and Dover roads and Dover rules. What are the advantages of being an accepted road specifically?
I would love if, Chief, if you would explain that?
Yeah, it's pretty much, it comes down to a small amount of money from the state, which is called Chapter 90 monies. We get roughly about $2,700 a year per lane mile from the state for our road network. So, you know, we have 73 miles roughly in the town of Dover, and that's how they base the allotments to the town each year. So that's one of the biggest pluses, but
Well, to the people who live on the road, you say some people choose not to, do not want to be considered, don't want road acceptance.
correct.
What would they not receive? Would they not receive help if a limb fell on the road? Would they not receive signage?
Right,
They
correct.
they obviously wouldn't receive plowing, I'm guessing.
No, we plow private roads, that was voted on in 1946 by the town to do that.
But we're now, private is one thing and road acceptance is another, or
Yes,
they're the
yes.
same?
Yeah, no, they're two different things.
All right, so we're talking about road acceptance. If a road is accepted by the town, they get 2,700, the town gets $2,700 from the
Yeah.
state.
Yeah,
And another advantage might be maintenance. There's a pothole. Am I right? I'm guessing.
no,
I'm-
sure, no, you're right.
They would get help if a limb fell across the road.
These are accepted streets, right?
Right,
Yes,
right.
yeah.
And they would get plowing. Is there anything, any other service?
Oh, they get all the maintenance that goes along with it,
Okay,
like any
so-
other road that's accepted,
Okay.
absolutely. But I'd say some of these private roads, like, I'll use a couple, for instance, like a Cullen Road. They remain, they always wanted to be private because if it became public, potentially it could connect to Juniper Lane and Chicory Drive subdivision. So
Right.
now you have additional traffic. Likewise with Miller Hill, there was talk back, years ago, that potentially, if that became private, it could connect over to Center Street. Buttercup, Turtle Lane, we know that circumstance down there with everything that happened down. But if you open it up to the public, it's inviting others, that's why they want
But
to stay.
and those private roads that are not open to the public still receive, as of 1947, you said?
46, yeah.
1946, they still receive these other.
Just plowing and sanding.
Oh, and they don't receive maintenance and the state doesn't pay them.
Right.
And they don't.
I just want to
signage.
understand so I can tell the other people that
Yeah.
are not able to be here.
And they maintain everything, like Cullen Road, all the residents, they pitched in, just had it resurfaced.
So private just gets snow plowing and doesn't get maintenance
Right.
and doesn't get other
Right.
advantages. Okay.
But I think the reason for it was back in the 40s was for public safety. It's, emergencies, that's why they.
Don't have to sell me on that, I'm with you.
Thank you, Chief, that's great.
So now, how does, so roads get accepted, so that means there's state funds, and the town provides all the services we just talked about. So is there separate acceptance criteria for a private road? So if you want to receive plowing from the town as a private road, what's the criteria for that?
Either, if I may, Madam Chair, either you go through this the street acceptance process that Gino described, or you rely on Chapter 40, Section 6C, which authorizes the selectmen to authorize plowing on a private way if it's available for public purpose. And that's a critical condition.
Okay, so the 1946 vote wasn't a blanket vote that said every private way,
Correct.
okay, qualifies for plowing.
It needs, and I just wanted to clarify again, it would need to be, although it's a private way, it would have to be serving the public as well.
Available for public purpose.
Oh,
And that's
available
that's a
for public
specific
purpose.
What does
language of-
that mean? Available
Well-
for public?
Public use.
Oh,
It
for
would have some
example, is
reason.
Riverside one of those streets?
Public use, yes.
So the public use there is access to the boat landing.
Okay.
All right, well, Spring Lane, for instance, which is right behind us, says private way, no throughway, and there's no access out. How is that accessible or useful to the public? Is that, they're plowed. So was that grandfathered in? Was that part of that decision?
As far as Spring Lane,
Well, Spring Lane, and there are others that say private and/or say no freeway. Now, Spring Lane, because I see it every day out my window, I know it's a short road, as you know. We call them dead ends. It says private way, no throughway, and they are plowed. Is that because of, is that a historical reason? It's an old road, I imagine.
well, it's historical, but again, I think they wanted to leave it private now that, the development that's there now.
Oh, I don't have any, I'm not asking
Right,
that. I'm
that's-
asking, well, I guess what I'm saying is if a road has no throughway, is not accessible to the public, as you said, isn't that the way you phrased it?
Available for public purpose.
Not available for public use. And says no throughway, which makes it very clear that it is not available for public use. And it still gets plowed. What I'm saying is, I'm thinking that, and maybe that's why this group needs to form, is to look at these variations. Some may be the result of history. I respect history. Some may be the result of decisions made long before. I wasn't even born in 47. Before I was born. So that we at the Meadows specifically are invested in understanding it. Most of us are new here. We want to be able to take advantage of what the town offers without being overbearing about it. We want to be treated like other people without being treated better or worse. So I'm just trying to understand this.
Right, and I appreciate that. Maybe it would be time for me to turn to ZBA and talk a little bit about your process, what happens when someone comes before you, how a decision might be rendered, what you feel is your role in this.
Well, all we handle is matters that come before us on appeal from decisions of other boards, the bodies, or the building inspector. So we wouldn't normally play any role in determining whether a way should be accepted as a public way or not. But it isn't normal, and at the time I've been on the board, which is several years now,
Right.
there's never been an issue before us that involved whether a way should or shouldn't have been accepted. It's not something that would normally come before us.
Right.
It seems to me that because this Meadows was a 40B, they were allowed to bypass a lot of the town rules. So perhaps the roads aren't as wide as they should be, and the turn radiuses aren't as large as they should be. In order for them to build as many houses in there as they have, they had to bypass a lot of rules. So they bypassed all the rules. Maybe they didn't tell the people that were buying the places that they were in a place with unacceptable streets because it's a private colony. And so I think that is the problem, that they didn't get the word that it was a private colony and they're unaccepted roads because they're too narrow. That's just the way I think it is.
I don't want
Just-
to get into an argument about
Excuse me
that.
just one second. I would just like to, I'd like to let ZBA finish if I may. Thank you. Yes,
No, I'm finished, that was just it, that I think that's why they weren't accepted right away, because they were.
And I think it might be helpful to
Bypass.
understand that although it's not something that the Board of Appeals, the unusual circumstance where this could be a matter that we are involved in is the 40B process, where they come into the project and develop something under the 40B procedures. They are allowed to avoid the meeting the normal requirements, such as the standards for public ways. That's the whole purpose of the 40B allows them to avoid those kinds of normal requirements and limitations. And so on some of these 40B projects in town, you have a situation where the roads that are put in do not meet the normal standards for public ways. And I think that's why this issue arose in the first place and came up before the 2016 town meeting as a possible issue. But the thing to be aware of is that the 40B process is a process under state law. And 40B projects, I'm not an expert in this, no 40Bs have come up during the time I've been on the board. There was one where we did a modification of a 40B, and just doing the modification was pretty darn complicated. And the 40B approval process is much more extensive than that, and requires town council and so forth. But these things come up, and it's governed by state law. The 40B applications are approved. The agreements that are negotiated are approved by state bodies. And you can't, once you've approved a 40B project, there isn't an easy mechanism. You can't just change the situation in the 40B project itself unilaterally. There has to, and that's why we did this modification that came up while I was on the board. Didn't involve roads, but it involved a change in the terms of the 40B permit. And all of that has to be reviewed by town council, it has to be submitted to the state, it has to be approved by all the relevant bodies and boards, and it's a very complicated process. And it particularly would be a particular challenge where a situation like the roads not meeting town standards is built in as a term of the 40B permit. So you're trying to, if you come back afterwards and say, accept our public way, then you're basically wanting to change the terms of the permit, and you can't have, the town doesn't have the right to do that on its own. So even if you, I understand the purpose of the meeting tonight to talk about possibly establishing a committee to review standards for acceptance of public ways, but I don't think there's anything that such a committee could do that would solve the problem for a 40B project.
Right.
That's not a town thing that we can set the standard and have that be something
Right.
determine the issue.
And I'm assuming that makes total sense to me. And furthermore, interestingly enough, with ZBA being sort of the definitive final step in town, once a decision is issued or terms are established through this negotiating process, then theoretically you're saying nothing really can undo that short of state intervention or something to
Well,
that
there's a
effect.
process for modifying a
Right.
40B permit, but it's complicated
That's
and
what I'm
involves a
hearing.
lot of legal work and a lot of technical expertise, and it's something that's very involved and not something that town meeting can approve on its
Right.
own, or that the selectmen can approve, or that anybody else in town can unilaterally approve.
So it has nothing to do with guidelines or anything like that. You're answering to a much higher authority.
Different authority.
Different authority, right. I appreciate
You
that.
don't want to see our local control here.
Right, but I hear that. Thank you very much. Excellent explanations, very helpful, thank you. Yes, Ms. Fisher?
I just want to end, that was very helpful to me, thank you. I think there's an assumption that because a project is 40B, it may then not conform to the town standards. And I would say to you, I haven't studied it, or this is something I really don't know about, but I do know we did do an expensive engineering study. And I would have to go back and find out if we do conform at the Meadows. I don't know, I'm assuming Dover Farms, although I know they're not a condominium, it's still Is it June 40B there? I don't even know.
Excuse me?
Does the Dover Farms, so if Dover Farms is also a 40B, I don't know if they conform. I don't know if Tisdale, which is also a condominium. I'm not familiar enough to know who conforms and who doesn't and who needs to. But I would hate for there to be an assumption out of hand that because it's a 40B, it then does not conform. Because it may not need to, doesn't mean it doesn't.
You can.
Am I misinterpreting what you said?
No, but what I can tell you specifically is that in fact,
It
the
does not?
Meadows does not conform. It's built into the permit, it's written into the terms of the 40B permit, which is a public record, you can access it, and it takes a while to read through it because it's a lot of
I'll
detail.
find somebody who's better at small print
But
than I am.
when this came up as an issue before the 2016 town meeting, the selectmen asked for input from the planning board and the board of appeals. And in the memos that were submitted to the Board of Selectmen, it lays out the ways in which the roads in the meadows do not conform with
Would they
town
be
requirements.
highlighted in there just for people like me who have trouble?
With what you highlighted?
In the ways in which it does not conform?
Oh, the memos are not that long. If you
Oh, okay,
copy
the way you said it, I was envisioning trying to
Well, I
find.
think the permit
The
itself,
40B permit is very complicated. It deals with dozens of issues.
Well, it's not the 40B permit that would be the issue, it would be
The
the,
memos and the letter, there's a memo from the planning board and a letter from the former chairman of the Board of
Okay.
Appeals to the selectmen, and I'm sure you have.
Right, we
copies of
do.
those. And
very helpful.
that will lay out the ways in which there's a problem specifically with the memos.
And if you want to contact our office, we can provide those to you.
Right, that would,
You know, I'm here tonight, as you probably realize, because I'm the one who's not on vacation.
well, I appreciate.
So I'm here without a net, kind of flying without a net,
Okay.
so I'll figure it out.
I would love, I know you're having a little, well, I don't want to interrupt the consult. Mike, do you have anything you'd like to add as our town engineer? And you were so instrumental in the decisions that were made around other roads that I've been privileged to work with you about. I would love your input.
Okay, yeah, you have a process for someone to come forward and to take a piece of land and develop it into a parcel that has a subdivision on it, and they're following those rules and regulations. There are specific roadway layouts that they meet, such that when the property is further subdivided into individual lots and sold off, there is one common area there that is known as a roadway, and it met all the town standards, the width, the grades, the drainage, and then you get, and then as they said, the builder sells the lots and he retains the interest in the road until such time as he is ready to specifically turn it over to the town. That's all anticipated. We know under the process we follow today that is what will happen. There may be an odd occasion when you get a very small project with a short stubby road, for instance, where there's 2 or 3 lots on it. I've seen them in other towns. They may remain private, but generally speaking, the people who are buying roads, houses, buildable lots with houses on them on a specific subdivision are looking for the town to take that over. When you get to condominium type projects where it's your project, for instance, it's one large parcel. And what they have essentially is a driveway. And the driveways don't necessarily meet town standards. They don't have the turning radiuses that large fire engines require. They don't have setbacks from the houses, from the roadways. When you plow snow at times, you have a lot of material you have to put on the shoulder of the road. And then if you're making, you're going in, you're making almost a 180-degree turn to come back, it's extremely difficult. So developers will come in with condo projects, and again, they do not want to meet all the town requirements for road acceptance of the cost involved. They may not get 24 units. They may only end up with 5 or 6 units. So it's an economic scheme there. But I think the regulations you have are fine. I think they are applied. You've had a number of different projects come forward with specific roadway layouts, with lot layouts, and then you have this project where it is one lot with a driveway. And it's extremely difficult to go back later, and although you can get somebody to look at the driveway, and they couldn't put meets and bounds on it, but it just doesn't meet the standards. It was never intended to. So I think the process you follow is reasonable, and I think it's good, and I think continue with it.
Great.
So is the Meadows the only condominium complex in the town of Dover?
No.
No. No, you have Tisdale.
But
Tisdale was a number of individual lots along a main road that met a layout standard. So what you have is individual lots, and the majority of them are like fourplex condo buildings on each lot. But they didn't have common ownership in the road. The road was left identifiable and separate, and I believe it's a town layout. The property, Dover Farm, you have individual lots, and you have a main layout that is to town standards. But it's quite different than having just one large lot and a driveway.
On Dover Farms, the smaller roads are considered roads and not driveways?
Correct.
So thank you very much. That's extremely helpful.
So just to follow up on what you said, so then my assumption is that within Dover Farms and within Tisdale, the roadways meet the width, grade, and drainage requirements of the town regulations for a subdivision?
Correct.
Okay, so that's the differentiating item. Now what about, I know we talked briefly about Spring Lane. So Spring Lane is a private road. However, does that road meet the width, grade, and drainage requirements of a road in Dover?
For when it was constructed,
Okay, so it was.
it's an older roadway.
Okay,
As
so-
I said,
So then certain roadways have been grandfathered in.
yes.
Okay.
Would that have been a part of the 1996 cleanup, if you will, Spring Lane?
The study,
Yes.
yeah, they remained the state private.
Uh-huh.
They were all asked, there's percentages, each household in the neighborhoods, and there's a percentage, they came up and there was actually a form they had to fill out, saying they did not want to be, they want to continue to be private.
But because they, if I understand correctly, because they were a road that could have been laid out and could have been made a public road, it was because they were being grandfathered in, correct?
I don't know the answer to that.
Uh-huh,
I
okay.
really don't, Janice. I mean, back then it was, business and a gravel pit and a trucking company, so there's a lot of things that played into it.
I see.
But I would think, I'm sure the actual roadway was built to the standards of the town.
Right, at that
But
time.
the layouts here, I'm not quite sure.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Sorrow, would you like to add anything? Gino kicked us off beautifully from Planning Board, and anything you'd like to contribute?
He did, so I should mess up his good work. The only other wrinkle I can think of in the process here is that sometimes when subdivisions come to the planning board to be approved, there are road layouts that meet the requirements of the conventional zoning, but wouldn't necessarily be as preferable to the town for some reason as some alternative layout. So for example, a loop road that would disturb, sensitive areas or disturb a view or something like that, or just create more impervious surface than would have to be to serve the neighborhoods that are there. And so what we see oftentimes are folks will come and propose something like that, but in the end, the subdivision will end up being done with a road that terminates at a cul-de-sac and then comes back out. And cul-de-sacs are prohibited under conventional zoning, but if there's a benefit to the town of actually allowing for a variation like that in a case where someone can show that the conventional zoning option would work, but it's preferable not to do that, the planning board has the ability to approve that type of design. And in those cases, so I've been on the board now for 11 years, in those cases, we've had a few subdivisions that have gone that route. So I can think of Betsy Lane is one example of that, and there's one on Hartford Street, at least maybe the second on Hartford Street as well.
Kirby and Dancer and...
Right, Dancer and Kirby, they're both
right,
laid out like that.
right.
But in all of those cases, since I've been on board for at least the last 10 years, the dimensions of those roads actually meet the requirements of zoning, and it's really only the the cul-de-sac nature of the road is the difference. The Betsy Lane subdivision has Hunter's Path that comes off of it, that does not meet the current requirements for a road under standard subdivision dimensions, but it serves only one house, so it's effectively a driveway, but it's a named road. So that's the only other wrinkle to this. And sometimes what I think happens is that, the developers will come in and do these kinds of projects for roads that are set up in a way that's different than conventional subdivision requirements. They'll often have a residents association that will be set up at the time this is all done. And the planning board is always really careful to make sure all of this is in place, and they have the responsibility to maintain the road and all that going forward. But then when the houses are sold, and years later, that residents association is made up of individual homeowners, they frequently don't want the responsibility, and sometimes will end up coming to the town to see if they can work something out where the town would accept the road instead and then maintain and plow it.
And I'm hearing from both boards that in arrears, making these changes is either impossible or extremely complicated. In other words, that these decisions are made, in some cases, terms are established to aid the developer in his project, and the developer might be willing to sign away certain things in order to maximize the number of units on the land or something to that effect, and then it looks very different 10 or 15, 20 years later. It looks like, oh, those were terms that no one currently today is even aware of, much less would have signed up for. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that ring true?
So in the case of the subdivisions I was describing, that wouldn't necessarily be 40B projects. These are, conventional subdivisions.
Right.
There's just some change to what conventional zoning would typically allow. Normally, the disconnect ends up to be, over the passage of time, that the planning board would have required that something like a residents association be established and have responsibility for maintaining that road that doesn't otherwise comply. And yet, over time, as I say, when the owners come in, and especially with their kids on the street, and school buses that end up going up and down those roads, the residents will come to, a board like yours and start making the request that the road be plowed for safety or for other reasons. And protective agencies may also prefer, in some sense, to be sure that those roads are cleared in case they need to be there. So it's not the way that it's intended at the outset.
Right.
But it's what may end up happening sometimes. But as I say, in my experience on the planning board, actually, with regard to the dimensional requirements, I can't recall instances where you'd actually waived dimensional requirements on a road. Really, it's just the design in terms of a through road versus a cul-de-sac that comes back out.
Right, your roadways are meeting standards for width and turning radiuses and slope, for instance. When you get a higher density project where someone is envisioning one parcel of land with multiple units on it, and it's a driveway, they want that for economic reasons. They don't want to comply with the zoning regs, which would give them maybe 50% or some number less than what they can see with a higher density, non-conforming subdivision type of action.
I understand. That makes total sense. Total sense. Does anyone have anything further to add? Craig?
Yeah, if it makes anybody comfortable, no matter what, in the situation of an emergency, ambulance, fire, whatever it may be, and there's snow out there, we open it up regardless. And that includes anybody's driveway. We make sure we get to emergency situations. So that always happens. I will do that as long as I live. So
We're very grateful, very grateful.
yeah. So
I want to say that I am grateful and very happy to hear that, but I do want, there is a but, I would really hate for somebody to have to wait for the plows to get to any road, whether it's my road or a road across town, if the plows are out and about. I think that's risky. But I'm glad to know you'll be there,
never happened.
and I hope I never need to say.
You won't.
No, what he's saying is in the normal process, you're plowing town roads, but they have to get an ambulance in, he's going to be there no matter what.
Absolutely.
Your responsibility as a condominium owner in that association is to have your own group there to plow your roads, but he's saying they're gonna win no matter what. Your man
And
could just
I
pass.
fully appreciate that, and I frankly never doubted it, but I fully appreciate hearing it. I mean, I think having it said out loud here is very important to everyone in the town, certainly to us. The only thing that I'm still a little fuzzy about is, I took myself on a little tour of the town, and I actually measured some roads. I have my husband's old baseball measuring thing, and I think there's a real, there are some very narrow roads, some very wide roads. I understand some are very old, some of the subdivisions, and I'm just confused that some are seemingly so narrow, but still conform. Ours are actually pretty wide by comparison. And I understand that there's a semantics about condominiums and, what did you call them?
It's the 40B.
Well, I wasn't just looking at 40B, because frankly, I didn't even know which subdivisions are 40B and which ones aren't. I'm not 40B or not.
As you go around town,
Yes.
you realize in the 1600s, there were cart paths,
Yes.
and they evolved into roads. So you get varying width, you get varying layout width, you get varying pavement width. Over the years, everyone decided in the 30s, I think they decided to accept most of those roads that were in existence, and then you had further growth. And during that time period, in the 40s and 50s, that's when you started seeing towns actually saying, wait a minute, if you want to subdivide this, you're going to do it in this fashion. So over the years, towns had the right to allow quarter-acre lots, half-acre lots, and they put in roads that they felt were suitable at the time. So as you go around town, you will see differences. But it came to a point where they were accepted, the town maintains
So
them.
it's historic.
It's historic, and
But the newer roads all will be conforming in some way.
they conform.
And I think Mikey brought up another very key point, and that was turning radius. It's, there are lots of factors that go into making roads acceptable.
Yeah, when you have a fire truck with a
Yeah.
cab and an extended ladder truck that needs a 40 or 50-foot turning radius, one of your radii down there, that's extremely difficult for anyone to get. And so the normal practice, it wouldn't be approved, but we still look at how to protect the people in there. You have an installed fire system and sprinklers, so that was all taken into account. They will get a vehicle in there to assist as best they can, but the developer wanted one lot with a driveway, and we tried to match the protection needs with what you have. On a normal subdivision like Kirby Farm, it's a long meandering road, but you've got excellent vision, you've got straight layouts, and you've got, for the most part, a nice turning radius at the end. There's a cul-de-sac of almost 90 feet, so a truck can get in there, so there's no specific fire protection there. So as you come away from the town regs, you have to look at other avenues of protection in certain circumstances.
So helpful. I would like to ask if anyone has anything further to add. I'd be delighted to have anyone share anything further. What is your thinking, Mrs. Hunter, about, we had originally, I believe your original thought was it going to be necessary to have a working group? And I think that this has been an excellent forum, and I'm so happy it's been available for the public to hear as well, because I'm sure that many people have these same questions. And I am guessing that these questions have arisen in the past and will probably arise in the future. But the question is there anything that the boards feel a working group would add for all of you? Is there any desire on your part to participate in a working group, to look at general guidelines, or are you answering to your own regs?
So I think it's more a question for the planning board, because certainly the zoning board of appeals is only brought in when there's an issue. So the question is to the planning board, since I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that any new subdivisions or any new building projects typically come to you, right?
Other than the 40s.
Other than the 40Bs. So the question is the process robust enough? And do you think it's worth having, since 40Bs do go to the zoning boards of, the Board of Appeals, do you think it's worthwhile getting a group together just to look at that process and see if there are some guidelines that we should put in place or make more apparent to the individuals buying homes in a 40B subdivision where the developer decided that they wanted a driveway as to why this road could not be accepted as a town road?
My sense of that is just, as you've heard and seen tonight, in fact, so the professionals at the town know this stuff very well,
Right.
and they interact. You know, when these things come up, there's a lot of communication that goes on across departments. So there really isn't any bar to that kind of communication. That said, you know, I always find that more communication is helpful, and particularly with the volunteers on boards, and a group like yours, as Gina laid out in the very beginning, when folks come in who want their street accepted, you know, they're coming to you first. They're not coming to the planning board. And so to some degree, to have a mechanism for communication across these groups
I think
in instances like this,
right.
it can't possibly be a bad idea. The good news is the process that is in place seems to work well. And you've got very knowledgeable folks.
Right, and and then I would love to hear it again. I was also thinking, Mr. Ramsey, you have a meeting of all of the professionals in town to stay, it's a weekly meeting, is that true?
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. So you all sit down, so any of these new projects or whatever come up and you're all made aware at the same time to heads up on how things are moving through the system, correct?
Very much.
Right.
Well, I think what might be beneficial, because we get brought in when there's an issue or when a neighborhood would like their road accepted. And I think what would be really helpful to me and perhaps to the citizens of Dover, if that looking at the criteria is done in a working group so that you're not blindsided by the fact that potentially you forgot. Like Mike and Jerry is much more familiar with the rules and regulations surrounding acceptance of roads than I am, and although we're asked to deliberate. So I think to me, it would be helpful when these things come up for us all perhaps to have a joint meeting just like this, and together to talk about, you know, what are the criteria again because we may all know it. I'll tell you in 3 months from now, I will forget everything that was said at this meeting most likely, because other things will have come up. And so the next time it comes up, it would be really helpful to get this kind of input that we got this evening as to what's the criteria, you know, does this particular subdivision meet the criteria? Because otherwise, all this misinformation just starts to swirl around the town, and it's just not helpful. So I would like to see a process like that be put in place. And when a 40B comes up, you know, maybe somebody on the ZBA could walk through the complicated permit for us and just kind of highlight some of the things that were given up in order, you know, by the developer to maximize their profits.
Well, you can look at the permitting on the town files would have copies
I'm
of
sure they
the
do.
permits for the crazy projects. You can take a quick look at them and see how complicated they are.
No, and I know
what kind of
that.
issues they address.
Right.
I would say that if you're going to set up a working group or a committee of some sort, that it really wouldn't be appropriate for a member of the Board of Appeals to serve on it, because what would happen is if any of those issues addressed by the committee come before us on a matter on appeal, anybody who served on that
Would have to recuse themselves, sure, that makes sense, I understand. That's a very good point, and we're not making a decision tonight. I failed to say that we're missing one of our board members who had a family emergency, and it's a very big empty seat here, and so this has been informational for us. We're taking all of this under advisement, and I thank you all very, very much for attending and sharing all of this very, very important information. I agree with you, Mrs. Hunter. It's tremendous information. The point that I think as we close that is important to identify is that guidelines can't supersede regulations. So in other words, guidelines, whatever we're sort of talking loosely about guidelines, really are very subservient, if you will, to the regs that our boards answer to. So it's an interesting thought, but we can discuss that, and we'll put it on the agenda for 2 weeks from tonight, and with our other board member, consider this. But I thank you, each and every one of you, for coming tonight, because it's a very important discussion, and thank you very much, Mrs. Hunter, and all of you for coming. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gino, Chief, Mike.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mike.
Nobody's here.
That's right. The next thing on our agenda is to review the capital budget requests, and I'd like, if I may, Mr. Ramsey, to turn this to you.
Madam Chair, so it's that time of year again. We've started the capital budget process, and you have in front of you the capital budget for our operation, police, and highway. So if I can just sort of quickly walk you through the requests in that order. So we are looking for fiscal 19, we're billing as the final renovation project for the Carroll Community Center. It's one price tag with 4 components: the replacement of the boilers, the replacement of the heating, piping, and controls, the bringing up to code the handicapped accessibility at the building throughout, and then the final element is a lighting upgrade, electrical upgrade, and sort of buffing up the common areas. And the budgeted number for that, at this point, as I say, it's a single number, is $4 million. Everything else is as you saw it last year in the out years. In the new out year, 2023, we've added the renovation of the lower bathroom in the locker room at the PD, the painting of the Sallyport floor in the PD, air conditioning in room 214 and the Park and Rec office over at the Carroll Community Center, and then replacing the fire alarm system at protective agencies. That's a new item as well.
So the air conditioning in room 214, is that an addition or a replacement?
That would be an addition. We don't have air conditioning right now.
What is room 214?
I can't really describe.
Is it one of the conference rooms, one of the rooms that we use for meetings?
I think that's the Park and Rec room that they
right.
have up on the second floor.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Right. And if I may, the re-roofing of Townhouse has, that roof just keeps hanging in there for us. Is that true?
Well, the capital budget, particularly in the out years, are projections.
Uh-huh.
And that roof is original issue 1920s.
Wow.
So we're keeping an eye on it. It's a slate roof, so it's remarkably durable, but we've had not infrequent leaks in the building. But there's a magic number of slates that disappear each year. If you hit that threshold, then it's really time to replace. We haven't hit that threshold, so we
Okay.
keep...
Are we
working it out.
close? Or does it seem,
That's a good, that was my question.
Well, I'll stick with 2022, but I won't bet on it.
okay, all right, great. Thank you.
During our discussion with Colonial Water, we talked a little bit about the town being responsible for the infrastructure to deliver water to the town. So does that fall under this capital budget, and is it something that we're keeping an eye on?
We are keeping an eye on it. It
Okay.
doesn't fall into this 5 years.
Okay,
For
but
water-
it's something
We're
that you're looking at?
yes.
Okay.
As water systems go, this is a remarkably young system.
So that's a good piece of information. So what's the useful life typically of water systems?
Design life, I'm not really sure. I'm going to guess it's around 50 years now, but nobody replaces pipe on design life. They replace it based on condition. And we're not aware from any of the work we've done that the infrastructure, it warrants replacement in this 5 or even 10-year window.
Okay.
Doesn't mean there won't be leaks. We've had leaks.
Right, and that's what I was going to say, so the leaks are just normal wear and stuff.
And remarkably, relatively speaking, for a water system, very few.
Good, excellent.
So when was that put in, because the infrastructure was put in by us
When we had a well.
When the mobile leak, or prior to that?
We had the Church Street wells.
Okay,
I don't know how long they were there, but that's when we installed the water system.
okay.
I'm going to guess the 50s, but it's a
Okay.
guess on my part. And then it had to be abandoned because of the
Right,
contamination.
right, in the early 90s, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very
So when
much.
that happened, was it replaced? Or-
I know it was abandoned, and we tied into Colonial Water on that 3-year agreement that was sort of temporary in 94,
Right,
and
it
just
made me think of
continues.
that.
Wonderful. Well, if there are no further questions, we'll take this under advisement and vote on this when Mr. Jeffries is back and at the next meeting. Thank you.
And then turning to the police, for 2019, which is the budget year we're looking at, he's requesting the replacement of a single patrol vehicle. He indicates in his narrative that we had anticipated it would be 2 vehicles because of postponement of a vehicle in fiscal 18. Fortuitously, since nobody got hurt, that vehicle was involved in an accident which totaled it, and the insurance company paid for a new police vehicle. I don't recommend that instead of the capital budget process,
Right,
right.
but it was fortuitous. So he's only requesting the 1 vehicle in 2019. As he indicates in his narrative, he hopes to go back to the 1-2-1-2 going forward.
And this would be a 2-year if it weren't for the replaced
Well,
vehicle.
it would be a 1-year had the other one been replaced in
Correct.
fiscal
True.
18. But
I understand.
So now we're back to the 1.
Okay,
So it'll be 2 in 2020, 1 in 2021, 2 in 2022, plus the replacement of the chief's car,
excellent.
based on the plan so far.
And for Mr. Hughes?
For Mr. Hughes, I don't think he even asked for anything in fiscal 18.
Right, that's, right, there was nothing on it.
And people encouraged him, but they couldn't get him to bite. So for fiscal 19, he's requesting the replacement of one of his 6-wheel dump trucks for $180,000. Everything else has been sort of moved out a year to reflect the moving in of the replacement of that truck.
Wonderful.
As he indicates in his narrative, that truck had more wear and tear on it in the last year than they anticipated. So there's flexibility there, but it's 1 truck, everything else has been on the out years.
And I saw on Twitter that he actually used the
ATV?
ATV to rescue a mountain biker.
Oh, really? That was
Oh,
hurt in Noannet?
You know, and
Uh-huh.
I think it was 2 nights ago.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
So glad we have it available,
Right,
that's
right,
wonderful.
right. And they were able to, there were pictures of it going onto the trails
Wow.
to get the biker out.
Wow. That's wonderful to know that someone was able to get faster help.
Right, and that was, you know, those were the exact types of rescues that
They were talking
that
about.
they were talking about when they were arrested.
That's good news. I'm glad. I hope he's fine. Biker.
Right.
So we'll also revisit from Chief McGowan and Chief Hughes as well when we come back at the next meeting. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Next on the agenda is to make a slight change in the declaration around 46 Springdale. Mrs. Pugac, would you mind?
Sure. After the original plan for subdivision of 46 Springdale went down, was not approved in May of 2016, the subsequent working group was put together, which redesigned the plan, and in the redesign, there was no longer a requirement for an easement because part of the town-owned land would be running up the left-hand side of the property to allow access. That was overlooked in your original vote
I see.
of July 20th, and so therefore we would just like to delete that one small section which speaks to reserving an access easement on the property.
Perfect.
No longer need it.
Thank you very much. So I'll read this in the process of making the motion. How would that be? I move that the vote of the board at the public meeting of the Town of Dover Board of Selectmen on July 20th, 2017, declaring the property suitable for release, disposition, conveyance, or sale be amended such that Clause 2II, quotes, reserving an access easement on the property in a location to be determined by the town, unquote, be deleted in its entirety, meaning and intending that the board shall not be required to convey the property subject to any access easement. Do I have a second?
You have a second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I think just in simple terms, what this means is that the town already has public access, so there's no need for an easement.
And it will make it all the nicer as far as marketing the property.
Correct.
Delighted. Thank you. That's a very nice thing.
But the key point is, anybody listening, there is still public access.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Say it one more time, is this?
That's right. No, you're absolutely right.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Next on the agenda are appointments. I believe we have two. Mrs. Pugach, would you like to go first?
Yes, please. Mary Kerrigan, the chair of the Personnel Board, got in touch with me recently asking that Sue Jeremiah, who's been a member of the Personnel Board for a number of years now, be reappointed. I asked her to contact Ms. Jeremiah directly, and she enthusiastically agreed to re-up. Now, her term actually expired in 2016,
Okay.
so this would go through 2019, so
Perfect.
she's requesting reappointment for that
Excellent.
period.
Thank you very much.
So I have worked for many years now with Sue, and she's a great asset to the planning board. She is an HR professional, just like Mary Kerrigan, and the two of them really add a lot of professionalism to that board. And, and I think it's just a testament to how well that board runs, given the history of the members. I would say most members have served for more than one term, so there's a lot
Yes,
of
they
history
have.
on that board, which is really helpful when it comes to the process.
That's right, to maintaining
Right, to maintaining
a process of
the guidance and the
preservation.
process.
Mhm.
So I would be proud to make or honored to make a motion to nominate Sue Jeremiah for another term, 2016 through 2019 on the planning board.
Excellent.
Not the planning
Oh,
board, the
that's
personnel.
excellent.
I'm sure she doesn't want to be on the planning board.
Thank you, Mrs. Hunter, and I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Excellent. Mr. Ramsey, you have an appointment, I believe.
I spoke with Mr. Ford Spalding yesterday, and he has agreed graciously to re-up on the Board of Fire Engineers for another 3-year term.
Excellent. We've certainly had the privilege of working with Mr. Spalding in a number of capacities. Thank
I
you.
was just thinking of
Right.
this nomination, I have not seen Mrs. Spalding in a while. So I will make a motion to nominate Mrs. Spalding for another term on the Board of Fire Engineers.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Sorry.
Great. No, that's great. It's a team effort. That's right. Thank you very much.
It's weird with just two of us.
I know. In terms of other business, just in a very quick update, many of you who were watching at our last meeting may remember that we left and went to executive session. It was to discuss the ongoing negotiations around health insurance with our unions and for our town employees. And so one of the things that we have decided, that was decided at that executive session, is that Dover is going to participate in what I call a two-path plan. We will be negotiating with the unions, and at the same time, we were invited to participate in a study with the region to look at insurance options. and we agreed to be full partners in the study, and so we are coming to the warrant with a prior notice for our share of the consultant fee. We're asking for $10,000. We don't think it's all going to be spent, we don't think that's going to be necessary, but it is what we are requesting is $10,000. Do I have a motion?
Sure, I will make a motion to approve $10,000 for the purpose of hiring or participating in a consulting contract with the region to look at group health insurance options.
Excellent, thank you very much. I second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. And now, would you like to do the honors on the special licenses?
All right, and we'll just sign these after the meeting.
Fine, perfect.
So this evening, we have numerous requests for one-day special liquor licenses, and they are as follows. On September 27th, a request for the Connor Center for a BC History Department retreat. On October the 6th, a wedding at Elm Bank. On October 6th, a wedding at the Connor Center. On October 7th, a wedding at the Connor Center. On October 8th, a wedding at the Connor Center. On October 17th, a BC conference at the Connor Center. On October 18th, a Mass Horticultural Volunteer Dinner at Elm Bank. On October 28th, a wedding at Hale Reservation. And on November 4th, a cultural gathering at the Carroll Community Center.
Thank you very much.
And all of these have been approved by Chief McGowan.
Excellent. Then I move that we issue these one-day special liquor licenses for those as just read. Do I hear a second? Second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. The next is our minutes from the open session of September 14th.
I think that was the record short meeting so far for the season.
That's right.
Was it the first as well?
Right. We'll have to go some to speed that up.
I was laughing to myself that it was a record, a short minute. The minutes were still in excess of
Yes,
2
they
pages. So maybe the goal is short meeting, 1 page per minute.
That's great. I had no changes. They're great. I move that we accept the minutes for the meeting of September 14th. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Excellent, thank you. And I have, under citizens' comments, I'd like to make an announcement, a reminder that there is a special recycling weekend on Saturday, October 21st and Sunday, October 22nd at the transfer station. The items should be from residential properties, not from commercial sites, and the car stickers are required, Dover Transfer car stickers. What they'll be accepting are mattresses, box springs, and tires. Those will be accepted on both days from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and personal sensitive document shredding will be available Saturday from 9 to 12, and residents may bring up to 5 boxes to be shredded by a secure industrial-grade shredding truck. It's such a service.
And the truck gets full pretty quickly, so
Yes,
get there early.
right, exactly. And the last thing is that Bikes Not Bombs will accept bicycles to be refurbished and reused on Saturday, 10/21, from 9 to 12 noon. A $10 donation would be appreciated as you give in your bicycle for the refurbishment. So just a reminder to everyone to feel free to take advantage of that excellent weekend. Do you have any further comments or
That was
questions?
a great reminder.
Good. Any, for the good of the order from any of us?
No,
Are we
no.
fine? And there is our very full room dwindled to Rick is still here, thank heavens, but otherwise, we are all alone, and we wish you all the best. Thank you very much for tuning in. Good night. Oh, I should take a motion.
Okay. Do you make a motion to adjourn? I make a motion to adjourn.
I second, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Good night, thank you.